Welcome to the Stress Continuum, dealing with the other on-the-job injuries. This presentation is brought to you by Wilderness Chaplains, a nonprofit organization dedicated to bringing crisis intervention, training, and support to wilderness first responders and the communities they serve. Before we begin, a few acknowledgements. Thank you to Katrina Hurt, Laura McGladrey, and the United States Marine Corps for all of their hard work and contributions to the field of crisis response services. This presentation would not exist without your contributions. On this slide, you see the stress continuum model developed by the United States Marine Corps. This model shows how a stressor can interact with people's ability to be mission ready and cause us to go to different levels, reacting, injured, and ill. It also gives steps to return to mission ready, which is the green. This is a model that has been used and adapted by many people and organizations. We're going to look at a slightly different version of it in the upcoming slides, but I wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the work of the United States Marine Corps and let you see what the original model looked like in case there's interest or applicability to your work. Let's start with looking at that stressor that was on the first model, because that's something we need a common understanding of before we move forward. We call it a stressor because it's an event or occurrence or something that produces a stress response. That might be short-term, long-term, severe, not severe. It depends on the person experiencing the stress. Different factors like your ability to cope, where you are in relation to the stressor, how it affects you, what your role is regarding it, can all have an impact on how much it does or does not affect you. Take this example, shown in the image, of a vehicle on fire on the side of the interstate, with firefighters responding with a fire engine. If you were the person who owns this vehicle, that could be an incredibly huge stressor. You could be out of ability to cope because that was your only mode of transportation, you don't have the money to take care of it, you're worried about the belongings that are now on fire. This could be a huge critical incident for you. However, if you're someone who's just driving by on the interstate, this might be a minor inconvenience. Sure, it slowed your travel down, made you have to pull over to the side to let the emergency vehicles pass, but it's just that temporary inconvenience. It's not going to cause you to lose sleep or have long-term suffering. For the firefighters, this might not be a stressor at all. This is something they train for, they're equipped to handle. It's not going to bother them. They're probably not going to think about it much after they've dealt with the emergency and moved on. In the moment, it might be a source of immediate stress because they have to deal with the situation, but once that moment has passed, they can move on with their lives like nothing's happened. You can imagine there's plenty of other perspectives you could take in dealing with the situation, but hopefully the point makes sense. That an incident that occurs is not necessarily a stressor or a stressor of a severe nature unless it's taken in the context of the person experiencing it and their relation to it and their ability to cope with it. Now that we have a common understanding of how a stressor can impact people differently in different contexts, let's put this to work in the tool. Here we see the responder stress continuum, based on the model by the U.S. Marine Corps that was developed for first responders by Laura McGladrey with the Responder Alliance. You can see from left to right, we have the same color coding as the Marine Corps' model. Green for ready, yellow is reacting, orange is injured, and red is ill. So it moves in severity from left to right across the spectrum. We're going to go into each of these areas in a little more depth in the following slides, but go ahead and take a moment to look at this and get more familiar with the whole picture, and then we'll break it down. The first part of the stress continuum, the far left, is the green or ready column. This is where we want to be most, if not all of the time. Now, being in the green does not mean you're not experiencing stress. What it means is you can face the stressor, deal with the emergency, the stressful situation, etc., get through it, and be back in this green. It means you're not haunted by it, you're not thinking about it too much, it's not interfering with your life. It means that, in general, you feel like you have a sense of purpose. You're healthy, physically, emotionally, spiritually, you're able to sleep, you enjoy a sense of living, vitality, there's room for complex thoughts and extra things in your life. This is a good place to be. Especially good if we're people who face a lot of stress in our lives, because it's a good foundation to come back to. So our goal should always be to be in the green. And if we're in the green, keeping up with best practices to stay in the green. Some examples of doing this are keeping fit, whatever that looks like to you, eating right, making time to relax, taking care of those basic needs, building that resilience, and making sure you're good to go in that green so you can face the stressors when they occur. The second section in the stress continuum is the reacting or yellow column. So just like with the green, in this column we experience some kind of stressor, we're responding to it, and then afterwards, instead of being back in the green and operating as normal, we notice some effects that are lingering. These might last a few hours, the rest of the day, into the next day, but usually they're more short-term and we can get through them with just a few coping mechanisms. So first, what does reacting look like? Well, you can be kind of cynical, avoiding work, maybe taking more time off than you're used to, not feel interested in things you used to be interested in, not wanting to hang out with people or keeping your distance, needing space. You might be irritable, have a short fuse. You notice some kind of change, or others notice a change in you. But it's pretty short term. You might feel bleh, just like you're not motivated to do things, you're tired, you're not sleeping well. Again, this is something that is kind of short term. Maybe we're all kind of familiar with from having stressful situations in our life, especially if you're first responders. It shouldn't be that unfamiliar. The thing to do when you're in the yellow is to practice good coping skills and be able to get back to the green. Now, I say good coping skills because I'm sure everyone listening to this can list out good and not so good coping skills they have when dealing with stress. We're not going to get into a list of do's and don'ts here. What I'm going to do is encourage you to think about the coping skills you have that are healthy or beneficial or do help you get past the situation, rather than just being a short-term fix or masking what's wrong and not actually getting you past it. Just like eating, drinking, and getting enough sleep are good for your body, these are also good things for getting you through a stressful situation. 2 key notes for being in the yellow. 1 is make sure you find a way to get some sleep. When we sleep, our minds do a great job of processing what we've gone through and helping us reset the next day. Sleep can be a magical tool. The second awesome thing to do is talk to someone you trust. Odds are, if you just have one talk, vent, or spill your heart session with someone, you're going to feel a world of difference afterwards. Research indicates that the number one predictor of not going into long-term post-traumatic stress or serious mental and emotional harm is having a support structure in place, having people to talk to, feeling connected to others. So seriously, stop and think right now, who could I talk to if I was just kind of feeling bleh, wasn't doing so great? Have a good list in your mind of friends, colleagues, coworkers, emergency numbers, any resources you can think of, because sometimes just that simple conversation is enough to get you from the yellow back into the green. The third column in the stress continuum is the orange or injured zone. Now this one is a little more serious, and this is where we start hearing things thrown around like stress disorder or post-traumatic stress. Well, don't think about that language too much. Those words come up when you get into clinical settings or hospital situations or with advanced practice medical providers, mental health providers, etc. What you should think of this as is an injury zone. Specifically, call them stress injuries. We like the idea in this field about stress injuries because, like a physical injury, a stress injury needs to be assessed, treated, and given time to heal. And that's the awesome part. Once you treat that injury, it does heal. So hopefully that gives you something positive to think about if you're ever going through this. It does get better. When you're in the orange, experiencing a stress injury, you'll probably notice a lot of symptoms that interfere with your life, like sleep disturbances, numbing out, avoiding, feeling burnt out, maybe having nightmares or flashbacks to what you saw, like a traumatic event or horrible situation, feeling trapped, not knowing where to go. You can feel kind of distant from your life, disconnected, compartmentalized, probably going to feel exhausted, especially if you're not sleeping well. There's going to be physical symptoms popping up like headaches, stomach aches, all kinds of things can be making you just feel sicker and not good. And a lot of people, especially in the first responder field, start to express the I used to's. This is where you hear people say, I used to go out on the weekends, but now I'm just too tired. I used to enjoy taking my kids out for dinner, but I just don't think I can be around them without breaking down anymore. I used to want to talk to my spouse after dinner, but now I just try and avoid the conversation because I don't want to talk about it. Used to's can be a really good self-diagnostic tool if you hear yourself using them. When you're having a stress injury situation, it can be a little bit more difficult to get out of. If you've progressed this far, chances are it's getting a little more serious and you need some help. This is when it's a good idea to talk to a chaplain, counselor, medical provider, mental health professional, call a crisis line, we'll have some resources for that later, etc. Just talking to a peer like we did in the yellow can be helpful, but probably isn't going to get you past some of these signs and symptoms that you're experiencing. Talking to someone with more formal training who can help with a diagnosis or suggestions for next steps to take or make referrals to further resources can be incredibly beneficial in getting you out of the orange. Now, I also want to tell you that these boxes are not static. You could bounce between the orange and yellow, maybe even tip back into the green and then slide back into the orange based on different factors going on in your life, your ability to cope, your support network, etc. Just notice when it gets this serious, because like any injury, a stress injury needs to be acknowledged so it can be properly treated and begin the healing process. Now we're at the far right of the stress continuum. The fourth column, the red or ill column, is where things are much more serious and require advanced professional help. There is nothing to be ashamed of if you've ever found yourself in this column or you find yourself there in the future. This happens, especially in fields where we're constantly exposed to traumatic and stressful events that the average person doesn't have to think about and is not equipped to deal with. We face some pretty horrific stuff sometimes, and sometimes our ability to cope eventually breaks down. So when someone finds themselves in the red or ill section, this is the time to act, not blame, not criticize, and not shame. What does it look like when someone has entered the red zone? Well, there's probably a sense of hopelessness. Mental health things like anxiety and depression can get pretty severe. Intrusive thoughts, like flashbacks are normal, but an intrusive thought is when it comes over and over and it's just constantly in your head and you can't get rid of it. You might feel lost or out of control. You're definitely not able to sleep, maybe not for nights in a row. This is where you might start thinking about suicide. Even if you're not planning on doing it, the thoughts can pop into your head more and more, and that can be pretty scary. You might start blaming yourself, destroying relationships, sabotaging friendships, sabotaging work, hiding, having feelings of wanting to just disappear, run away, break all connections. You can have panic attacks and start making careless mistakes or find that you're taking bigger risks than you have before. These are all signs that something has gone very wrong, that stress injury has maybe gotten infected or wasn't treated appropriately, and it's time to get help. This is where you seek medical treatment by calling 911, going to an emergency room, contacting a crisis line for referral, or you schedule an appointment very urgently with a mental health provider, counselor, or some resource provided through work or your community. This is not the time to sit around and hope things get better. This is the time to take that hope and use it to strengthen your resolve to find resources you need to get out of the red. Many people enter the red in the course of their careers and do successfully come out. So this is not career ending. This is not a sign of weakness. This is something that naturally happens, even to the best of us, and there are ways to come out of it. So now we've looked at the 4 areas on the stress continuum, starting with the green ready, looking at the yellow reacting, the orange injured, and the red ill. This is a tool. It's something to help you understand, to communicate, to assess what's going on. It is not cast in concrete. It is not a static thing. So please take it and use it as you see fit. Hopefully this can start good conversations for checking in with each other, asking, hey, where are you today? What color are you at? Or telling someone, I'm kind of worried about you. You seem like you might be in the red. What's going on? Remember that you don't necessarily stay in any of these categories. You can move back and forth, or different stressors can change where you end up at different times depending on the timing, the situation, the support system you have, etc. We're going to look in the next couple slides into a few more details about what can help and how to be prepared should you find yourself in a zone other than green. But take as much time as you want to pause here and study this, feel more comfortable with it, and maybe do a little bit of a self-assessment. What color zone am I in right now? Can I remember a time when I was in a different color zone? And have I witnessed someone in any of these zones? And what do I remember about it? The more familiar we get, the more useful this tool can be. As we saw in the continuum model, talking to someone, whether it's a friend or different levels of professionals, can really help, not just with getting to different parts of the continuum, but also for preventing long-term harm and serious stress injuries and even disorders from occurring. Our support system, our network, the people we can reach out to, are crucial in treating our stress, making us more resilient, and helping us live better, more fulfilling lives. So think about for a moment who you have to reach out to, who could connect with you, who could you find in a crisis. Think about if you have family members or friends who you could connect with, even people in your neighborhood or somehow in a community. Think about your peers, people you work with, people you went to school with, people you see around in common places. Does your workplace have a peer support team, or a chaplain, or some kind of staff psychologist on retainer? Many agencies are moving in this direction. Whether it's a contracted crisis response unit or an internal team of your peers, there are usually options available, or places nearby that do have these options. As always, consider your mental health provider and your physician. If you don't have a primary care provider, now is a reminder to maybe find one, or at least look up how to find one in your community. There's different resources if you go online or call information services to figure out how to find someone. Think about it now before you end up in crisis or struggling to help someone who is in crisis. It's better to have these things planned out, thought of, and ready beforehand than to try and get them figured out in the heat of the moment. In addition to people you can talk to, there's also programs and services that are available, sometimes through your department or agency, sometimes in the community, that can be beneficial for making sense of a crisis, figuring out how to get through a stressful situation, and returning to normal and mission readiness. Here's a few examples. Crisis interventions, diffusings, or debriefings are tools that have been developed specifically for first responders and are used to come in the immediacy or aftermath of a critical event and make sense of it, diffuse it, help things go a little smoother. They don't work for everyone or every time, but there are definitely times when these are useful, and having a trained facilitator in these services can be very beneficial. After-action reviews can be helpful when you're stressed out by not knowing or not understanding, and you just want more information. These can help us learn lessons to be better prepared for next time and understand the bigger picture of what happened. Vent sessions are useful. Having someone you can talk to just complain, get it all out there, but they're only useful to a point. 1 or 2 vent sessions to get it off your chest and feel better about it is helpful. If you find yourself having the same conversation, the same complaints, the same venting over and over and over, consider that a red flag, that something is not getting resolved, and you might need more assistance than just talking to that friend or that coworker. Things like counseling, seeing your employee assistance program contacts, going to a mental health provider or a physician or a clinician, all of these are options when you need that extra help. Considering options like therapy, medication, clinical interventions, etc. can be scary, but it's important to remember that just like we have different levels of treatment for injuries, we have different treatment options and different levels for stress injuries. Finally, always think about wellness activities and how to keep yourself fit, happy, healthy, and full of joy. These can be things that focus on our physical body, our mental health, our spiritual well-being, our emotional and relationship connections. Anything you can think of that's going to benefit you and your loved ones is a great thing to focus on before you find yourself in another zone. In addition to the people and services available in our communities and our circles, there are also formal response lines and programs out there on a local and national level that can help us, especially as first responders. Take a look at these and see what sticks out to you, what you might want to record somewhere, save in your phone, or write down. Not necessarily for yourself, but also for your loved ones if they ever are worried about you and what you're going through, or if you run into a colleague, a coworker, or someone else who's in trouble and you don't know where to turn to for help. Resources like Code 4 Northwest and Safe Call Now are specifically designed for first responders and their families and can be a really nice place to contact if you're not sure or feel like no one's going to understand what you're going through, especially as a first responder. Resources for everyone include the Crisis Text Line, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, and Psychology Today, which helps you find therapists, as well as all kinds of other resources you can find online and in your community. A note with the Crisis Text Line. A lot of people like this because you can more discreetly contact a texting line than making a phone call. So I recommend everyone commit this number to memory or write it down somewhere or put it in your phone. 741-741. If you send a text message to that number, there might be a short delay, but you will be connected with a trained crisis counselor who will text with you and help you that way. It's a great option, especially for teens, youth, or people who are just too embarrassed to make a phone call or are sitting on duty or in their station and need help but don't want to be overheard asking for it. So think about what works best for you, what might be available to someone you know or care about, and what you want to have resources for in the future in case something goes wrong. Thank you for attending this presentation. Consider visiting us at wildernesschaplains.org to learn more about our organization, and please consider making a donation to support this and future trainings like it.